All right, so the next tool we're going to be covering is VS Code or Visual Studio Code specific. If you're using a different editor, there might be different options out there. I'm not familiar with them, so we're just going to be covering the Visual Studio Code version of it. And basically what this tool is going to do is bring a more traditional IDE style debugging process to your app. If you used Eclipse for Java, Xcode I think has this kind of stuff. It's going to bring similar things in, breakpoints, all that kind of debugging stuff in. So this tool is actually called React Native Tools, and you can go ahead and search for it in VS Code. Go ahead, install it. You'll have to restart your browser. And to use it, it's quite straightforward. What we're going to do is actually click this little debug icon. I'll go ahead and expand this. And up here, it's going to say no configurations. What I can do is actually say, I want to add a configuration. And once you've installed React Native Tools, React Native will be an option for you. You can go ahead, add this configuration, and we can see we've got this one changed file in here. Don't save that. Okay, so we've got an added file in here, and this launch.json is basically going to give us a few different options. We can debug Android, debug iOS, attach to a packager, debug exponent. And this is basically just allowing us to launch the application from our app or attach to an existing running application, which we're going to do now. Before we do that though, make sure you actually go ahead and turn off remote debugging. Right now it says debug JS remotely. You want to, of course I can't remember it now, but it's like turn off remote JS debugging so that you see in your menu debug JS remotely. So once that's done, what we're going to do is actually go back to the debug menu. I'm going to say attach to packager. And the reason I'm saying attach to packager is because I've already got it running in a terminal window from when I ran React Native Run iOS. I can then press this play button. And what it's going to go ahead and do is try to connect to our React Native app. And to allow it to do that, we actually need to go ahead and press debug JS remotely, which then has it look elsewhere to do the JavaScript processing. And then we can see here in the editor, it's going to go ahead and pop up with the actual JavaScript debug runner happening. And basically what this is doing is it means VS Code is actually handling the JavaScript rendering of our application, which means we can actually interface and kind of tell it what to do and when to do it. What's that look like in practice? Well, let's say, go to this app.js. We've got this increment and decrement. To actually do this, we would need to say this.setState. We could say return number is going to be state.number plus 1. Right? That makes sense. Make sure I don't have this typo in here. Okay. So we've got that for increment and decrement. Cool. So when we go about, minimize that, increment the number, that's not working because I've got a typo here. This should be number, not number. Increment, perfect. Oh, you know what? Decrement's not decrementing the number, it's still incrementing it. Well, that's not convenient. How can we go about debugging this? Well, do you like how I plan this out? What we can do now with VS Code React Native Tools installed, if you look to the left of the line number, you can actually go ahead and start adding these little red dots, and these red dots are breakpoints. So what we could do here is actually add one there, and we could add one here, or down here. So basically what's going to happen here is execution of our app is going to halt at that point. So if first in the editor, we're going to go ahead, open up this debug menu again, and then I can refresh the app. And we can see when I actually press decrement, it's going to pause execution. The number hasn't gone down. The button hasn't even, it's still highlighted. And it's telling us we're stopped here on this line. We can go ahead, dive into the app. We can see a bunch of information. We can look into these closures, which is where we're actually going to find the information. We can see our number is 97. Okay, that's what we expect. That's cool. Now I want this to continue on. I want to go to my next breakpoint. So I can press continue, and it's now going to tell us we're down here. And again, it's giving us the state of everything. And actually in here, what's happening, we can see This is an interesting insight. Our number is still 97. And the reason it's still 97 is because the set state is asynchronous, so we're actually hitting this line before this finishes. But what we can do here, and what you can really see where the value of this approach of debugging works, is we can get a lot of information here without that much work. So that's a nice benefit of going this route of using the debugger. You can just go ahead and really view a lot of information for free. Basically, VS Code is going to go ahead and pull all of this in for you automatically. We could also add another debug point in here instead. So we'll turn these ones off. Actually, we'll look at this one. So I could go ahead and play it. So what we just saw there, that red screen error, was basically if you hang on a debug point for a long time, I found the package just kind of breaks. It's not the best, but you're not always going to be stopping at breakpoints. They're just kind of used for debugging, so you can get those insights into the state of your application. So we'll try it again, look at it. I'll go ahead and look into this. We need to look at the closure. So we've got state, we see 36. Okay, cool. We'll go ahead, go to the next one. We'll look at state, it's still 36. This time we want to look at local, I think, so we can see the state. It's showing up there, and we can see it's incrementing to 37 after this point. Basically, it's giving us a bunch of information to go ahead and kind of debug it. It's very much, how you use it. It's just giving you a lot of insight, a lot of information for you to use if you choose to. I'll be totally honest with you, this is not a method of debugging I use very often. I find it a little cumbersome. It's not something I ever really learned. I learned how to debug with console.logs, just what we used. But if you're coming from a different environment where you're used to using breakpoints, you're used to using these debugging menus, this is a great option for you for React Native. For example, if you're coming from a native iOS or a native Android development world, and you're coming into React Native to kind of expand what you can target, this is a great way to use those similar debugging experiences you're used to. So before we actually close off this video, I need to fix my bug, which is decrement should subtract, not add one. And then that's going to allow us to actually have an application that works. And we can see since we don't have any breakpoints now, we can go ahead and use the application as normal. Once our debugging session is done, we can just go ahead and turn it off with that little red button. It's always going to throw an error when you turn that off, but once we restart it, it's all good to go. Last thing you might want to do is in your .git ignore, which I already have, you might just want to add in .vs code /.react. Those are just a bunch of temporary files that VS Code is using to debug the application that you don't need to keep. And I keep getting errors over here. Again, like I said, it's a little iffy using VS Code or React Native tools in VS Code, but it is a tool to add to your toolbox if the traditional methods you're used to aren't working. So you can go ahead and debug an application. So yeah, that's React Native tools in VS Code. Give it a shot, see how you like it, if it works for you or if it doesn't work for you, and we'll move on to the next one.